There are moments in history when human beings believe they are standing at the peak of victory, while in reality they are standing before a door that is about to close forever. Imagine an endless sea of people in the middle of the desert. More than 100,000 souls gathered on the same day in the same place, performing the same ritual. There was no war, no bloodshed, no clash of swords. Only prayer, tears, and hearts turned toward Allah. For most people, it appeared to be the most glorious moment in the history of Islam. The religion was complete. The mission had succeeded. The entire Arabian Peninsula had changed, but history does not always tell the truth to the majority. Within that vast crowd, only a few hearts trembled with a heavy intuition. No one spoke it aloud, yet they felt it, not with their ears, but through a quiet emptiness slowly spreading in their chests. Something immense was coming to an end. And when a great mission reaches its conclusion, the one who carried it will not remain for long. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, stood there not like a victorious king, not like a man celebrating the achievement of a lifetime. He stood with a strange calm, as though he was seeing what hundreds of thousands around him could not yet perceive. He did not speak words of farewell. He did not announce anything that would shake the crowd. He allowed the truth to sink in gently, like a sunset settling over the desert, slow yet irreversible. Because there are farewells that, if spoken plainly, would shatter the human heart instantly. To the world, this was a moment of completion, but to history, and it was a moment of preparation for the greatest loss the Ummah would ever face. A loss not merely of a man, but of a source of comfort, a guide, a protector, someone who had carried the pain of an entire community for more than 2 decades. Pause for a moment and ask yourself this. Why was an event later called the Farewell Hajj not immediately recognized by most people as a farewell? Why did the majority rejoice while only a few wept? What was said and what was left unsaid? Perhaps because human beings often look at the surface of victory while Allah looks at the end of a mission. In that moment, no one saw history holding its breath. No one heard the invisible clock counting down. But one thing was certain. From that point onward, every word, every glance, every action of the Prophet, peace be upon him, carried a different weight. It was no longer about beginnings, no longer about building. It was about preparing to hand things over. Preparing to hand over a completed religion. Preparing to hand over a mature community. Preparing to hand over a responsibility that no one could carry on behalf of another. And it is here that the real story begins. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained, where we do not simply retell history, but step into the moments history often overlooks. Silent moments that carry the weight of an entire era. If you think this story is only about the final days of a prophet, you are mistaken. This is a story about us. About how a community is prepared to stand firm when the guide is no longer walking ahead of them. About how a mission does not end with death but begins with responsibility. And if, even now, you sense that what is about to unfold is not an ordinary story, subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support us. Your support is what allows stories like this, deep, honest, and meaningful, to continue being told. Because when the story reaches its conclusion, the greatest question will not be what happened, but what we will do with it. When Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, raised his voice that afternoon, what caused history to pause was not the content of his words, but how he began. He did not say, "O Muslims," he said, "O mankind." That single form of address shattered every boundary. No community, no tribe, no past or future. His words were not meant only for those standing at Arafat that day, but for everyone who had lived, was living, and would ever live upon this earth. This was not a sermon for a moment in time. In it was a message that transcended time itself. The Prophet, peace peace be upon him, did not stand there as a legislator issuing laws. He stood as a father, a guide, handing humanity its final principles so that it would not destroy itself after he was gone. He understood a painful truth all too well. Human beings do not lack strength. They lack moral restraint. So the first thing he spoke about was not belief, but the value of human life. He reminded them that life is sacred. No one has the right to treat another person's life as something to be traded, sold, or sacrificed for personal ambition. Honor is just as sacred. A false accusation, an act of humiliation, a violation of dignity, all are crimes, even if no blood is spilled. And property, the very thing people are willing to kill for, must never become a tool of oppression. He placed life, honor, and wealth on the same level of sanctity as sacred time and sacred space. It was a radical reversal of thinking. For the first time in history, a community was reminded that human beings matter just as much as the rituals they perform. Then he addressed the deepest disease of society, economic injustice. He abolished all forms of usury, every system that enriches itself by draining the vulnerable. He knew that when economics become corrupted, faith soon follows. A society may pray 5 times a day, but if it is built on exploitation, its collapse is only a matter of time. Then he spoke about women, not as a secondary topic, not as a passing remark, but as an amanah, a sacred trust from Allah. He reminded men that they do not own women, they are entrusted with them, and anyone who betrays that trust will answer before Allah. In a society that had once buried newborn daughters alive, these words were not reform. They were a moral revolution. Yet perhaps his most earth-shattering words were not about laws, but about dismantling humanity's false scales of worth. He declared that all people are descendants of Adam, and that Adam was created from dust. There is no superior race, no superior skin color, no noble bloodline, no history that grants one human being the right to stand above another. The only remaining measure is taqwa, conscious awareness and reverence of Allah. With a single statement, he buried the seeds of racism, tribal supremacy, and civilizational arrogance, 14 centuries before the modern world would even name these diseases. And once the principles were laid, once the moral foundation was established, the Prophet, peace be upon him, handed over his final legacy, not power, not a list of successors, but a compass. He said that if you hold firmly to the Quran and the Sunnah, you will never go astray. He did not say human beings would never make mistakes. He knew human nature too well. But he gave them a compass, not to avoid every storm, but to always find their way back. In that moment, history received a complete moral charter. No amendments needed, no additions required, independent of time, a system capable of functioning while he was alive and continuing after he was gone. And perhaps what makes this sermon so powerful is not only what was said, but the unspoken awareness that these were final words. No one dared say it aloud, yet hearts understood. And these words were not meant to be debated, not meant to be reinterpreted endlessly. They were meant to be preserved, because when someone is about to depart, what matters most is not whether people applaud, but whether they live by what they heard. After the address to all of humanity, the atmosphere at Arafat grew quiet. The cheers faded. The excitement of witnessing a historic event dissolved into something heavier, harder to name, as though everything had been placed exactly where it belonged, and because of that, there was nothing left to add. And then that verse was revealed. Today I have perfected your religion for you, completed my favor upon you, and chosen Islam as your religion. For most of those present, it was a moment of joy. The religion was complete, the blessing fulfilled. They looked at one another with relief, imagining stability, strength, and a clear future ahead. But Abu Bakr wept, not because he lacked joy, but because he understood what most had not yet grasped. When Allah declares that the religion is complete, it also means the mission of the messenger has been fulfilled. And when a mission is fulfilled, the one who carried it will soon be called back. This was not pessimism. It was the insight of a heart that had walked beside the Prophet, peace be upon him, from the earliest days. A heart that had witnessed every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, every rejection, and every moment of divine comfort. Abu Bakr understood that no completion comes without separation. From that day forward, the signs did not arrive loudly but softly. During that Ramadan, Jibril reviewed the Quran with the Prophet, peace be upon him, twice. No announcement was made, but those who understood knew this was no ordinary Ramadan. It was as if the revelation was being reviewed one final time, sealed and fully entrusted. The Prophet, peace be upon him, began visiting the graveyard more frequently, not to mourn but to greet. He greeted those who had gone before him like someone preparing to follow. There was no fear in those greetings, only calm acceptance from someone who knew exactly where he was headed. Then there were words that sounded like comfort, yet carried profound transition. He spoke of my brothers, those who would believe in him without ever seeing him. When the companions asked whether they were not his brothers, he replied that they were his companions, while those who came later would be his brothers. There was no exclusion in those words, there was preparation, and he was expanding the embrace of the Ummah beyond time and space, ensuring that after he was gone, the community would not close itself around memory, but continue moving forward. What is striking is that through all these signs, the Prophet, peace be upon him, showed no concern for himself. He did not speak of his pain or the weakness of his body. His only concern was what would happen after he was gone. Would the community remain united? Would the religion be distorted? Would the values he established be protected? That is why his preparation came not through grand declarations, but through repeated actions and guiding choices. He did not only teach people how to believe, he taught them how to take responsibility for belief. The completion of the religion did not mean human beings had become perfect, and it meant they had been given every necessary tool. From that moment on, no one could claim they did not know where to return or what to hold on to. Every path was marked, every standard was set. This period was not the prelude to death, but the prelude to transition. The focus shifted from the speaker to the listeners, from one individual to the entire Ummah. Abu Bakr wept not out of weakness, but out of understanding. From that moment forward, the burden would no longer rest on one set of shoulders. It would be shared by all who believed, all who lived, and all who would come after. When a mission is completed, responsibility does not disappear. It simply changes hands. And in the heavy silence of that moment, history quietly entered a new phase, one in which every believer would have to ask themselves, and when the guide is no longer walking ahead of us, are we strong enough to continue the journey? In those final days, the body of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, weakened day by day, but one thing never diminished: his awareness of Amanah. As physical strength faded, what became clearer than ever was not authority or honor, but absolute responsibility before Allah and before people. At a moment when anyone else might have been shielded by mercy or exemption, he chose the opposite. He stood before the community and said words that silenced everyone. If anyone had ever been wronged by him, come forward. If anyone's rights had been taken, reclaim them. No barrier stood between the Prophet and justice. No title shielded responsibility. He wanted to meet Allah with a heart free of any claim belonging to another. And these words were not merely humility. They were the final definition of leadership in Islam. A leader is not someone who never errs, but someone who never escapes accountability. In that moment, the community understood that justice does not stop at doctrine. It must be lived even when the one living it is the most beloved. When Ukasha stood, the mosque seemed to freeze, not out of fear but uncertainty. No one knew what would happen next. The Prophet, peace be upon him, did not argue, explain, or justify himself. He asked for the whip. When Ukasha said his back had been bare, the Prophet quietly exposed his own. In that instant, authority vanished completely, leaving only a human being standing before justice. Ukasha did not strike. He bent down and kissed the seal of prophethood. In that moment, the community witnessed a lesson no law book could capture. Justice stands at the highest level, but forgiveness is its peak. No one forced Ukasha to forgive, and no one stopped him from claiming his right. His choice was completely free, and it was that freedom that made his action noble. After that moment, the atmosphere in the mosque changed. The tension dissolved. Fear disappeared. Only a deep calm remained, as if the community had been cleansed of the last seed of division. The Prophet, peace be upon him, taught them something beyond words. An Ummah stands only when justice and mercy exist together. Yet the Amanah did not end there. When his strength no longer allowed him to lead prayer, the greatest question was not who would stand at the front, but who would keep the community from fragmenting. He did not convene councils or issue political declarations. He simply said, "Let Abu Bakr lead the prayer." In Islam, prayer is not merely a ritual. It is the axis of spiritual life. Whoever stands before the community in prayer stands between them and Allah. Choosing Abu Bakr was not personal favoritism. It was moral guidance. He was teaching the Ummah that leadership begins not with power, but with standing humbly before Allah. Some did not grasp the depth of that decision, others did. History would later confirm that this was no random choice. The Prophet, peace be upon him, did not leave a list of successors, but he left a principle. The one who carries the community must be someone the community has seen in humility, in tears of prayer, and in unwavering trustworthiness. In those days, his words became fewer but heavier. Each sentence felt measured. He reminded them of prayer, not as ritual, but as the final rope connecting humanity to Allah when everything else collapses. He did not fear that the community would forget, but he knew that in pain, in conflict, in worldly distraction, prayer is the first thing people abandon. His body weakened, but the Ummah was being strengthened. He did not want them to remember him as someone who left in suffering. He wanted them to remember the values etched into those final days. Justice without compromise, mercy without coercion, and communal order preserved even in separation. Those final days were not the end of a story. They were the first test for those who remained. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, was no longer standing before them, would they preserve what he had lived and handed over? And in that heavy silence, the Ummah received its greatest amanah. Not through oaths, but through living examples history would never forget. The moment arrived quietly, without trumpets or signs in the sky. It came in a suffocating stillness, as if the universe itself had paused to witness a soul preparing to depart. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not cling to life, nor did he look back at what he had built. As the final moment approached, his choice was not the world he had known for 63 years, but something higher than all of it. He chose Al-Rafiq Al-A'la, the highest companion. This was not an escape from pain, but the return of someone who had completed what was entrusted to him. When that final breath left his chest, Medina lost its bearings. No one was prepared for the immediate emptiness that fell upon the city. Some stood frozen, some wept silently. Some could not accept the truth. To them, he was not only a prophet, he was guidance, refuge, and the final voice when all disputes reached dead ends. That confusion was not weakness. It was the result of overwhelming love. A community accustomed to someone walking ahead finds standing alone to be its first and hardest test. Some denied that he had passed. Some claimed he had merely departed temporarily like prophets before him. These words came not from reason but from grief not yet shaped into acceptance. And in that moment of chaos, history was once again steadied by the Quran. Abu Bakr stood not with force or command but with a verse revealed years earlier. He reminded the community that Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a messenger, and messengers before him had passed away. Allah alone is ever living and never dies. His words did not erase grief, but they placed it correctly. Faith is not attached to the presence of a human being. It is attached to Allah. Once the truth was accepted, sorrow did not lessen, but it became ordered. People cried without panic. They hurt without losing direction. A community had lost its guide, but not its path. The Prophet, peace be upon him, left behind no treasure, no power, no empire. What he left was so simple that many did not immediately grasp its weight. The Quran and the Sunnah, a book and a living example, yet that simplicity was its greatest strength. This legacy does not require guards in palaces. It requires people willing to carry it into their lives. From that moment on, the story was no longer about him. It turned to those who remained, and to those who would never meet him yet were mentioned by him with special affection. My brothers. That title was not for those standing around his bed, but for those who would believe, love, and walk the path without ever seeing his face. That title was not a reward, it was a call, a gentle call heavy with responsibility. Loving him is not only shedding tears at his name. Loving him is living so the Quran is not abandoned, the Sunnah is not distorted, and justice is not sacrificed for personal gain. The mission did not end with death. It entered a more difficult phase, one without immediate correction, without a final earthly verdict. From then on, every generation would have to measure itself against that legacy and ask, are we drawing closer or drifting further from what was entrusted? Yet the one who departed did not take the Ummah with him. He left it behind with a question, unspoken yet echoing through centuries. What will you do with what has been given? That question is not for the past, it is for the present, for every person listening to this story. Because legacy does not live in history books. It lives in how each person turns history into daily life. The deepest lesson from this story is this. Faith is not a passing emotion. It is a lasting responsibility. Love is not proven by tears or praise, but by consistency day after day. Justice is not only a concept for great moments, but a series of small choices repeated in ordinary life. And mission is not reserved for the great figures of history. It belongs to the quiet effort of ordinary people. Applying this lesson today does not require extraordinary acts, and it begins with holding on to principles when no one is watching. With honesty at work, fairness in treatment, and kindness in speech. With refusing to trade values for short-term gain. With nurturing faith through action, not promises. In a world of constant change where standards shift and belief easily wavers, the story of the Prophet, peace be upon him, reminds us that the righteous path may be lonely, but it is never wrong. And every step taken in truth, no matter how small, is part of the great mission that was handed over. If you wish to continue exploring historical stories with depth, timeless lessons from the lives of the prophets, pivotal events in Islamic history, and how these values illuminate modern life, join the Prophetic History Explained community. This is a space for learning, reflection, and connection with the spiritual legacy that shaped an entire civilization. Finally, do not forget to subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support us in continuing to create content that is deeper, more honest, and more meaningful in future videos. Your support is how these stories continue to be told and how these values continue to be lived.